Hello and welcome to the Time Trek podcast. My name is Antonio Panella and I'm here with my dear friend Mohammed Abu Bakr. And today we are going to talk about the reflections of 2024, just events that have gone on that have really impacted us and what we think those can turn into for the next couple of years. To start it off, I'd like to hand it over to you. What is one thing that sticks out in your head that is just like 2024? This is the first thing that pops out. What really resonated with you this year?
Thanks for the introduction, Antonio. It's been so from depending on how you analyze the year has been a mixed bag. From an economic standpoint, it's been a slow year, and there's a lot of anticipation for 2025. From a political standpoint, there have been multiple changes that have happened in the world.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of positives there and negatives as well.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and overall, from a progress innovation standpoint, I would say there has been steady progress, but nothing out of the box that has absolutely dazzled. But at the same time, I think AI has become much more common and it's been adopted much more by the organizations, say, compared to 2023, 2022. So yeah, so there's been like a mix of things that have happened. I wouldn't say it's been a great year, but it hasn't been bad either.
Mm-hmm.
But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, there have been few grim realities that people have encountered this year with with a lot of things, with U.S. elections, with the war in Gaza, with Ukraine crisis, with some revolutions that have happened in countries, with toppling of some regimes,
So
Olympics, a lot
just
of
to
things.
just to kind of bring this in though, where like, we want to get a good, interesting, deep talking point right now to kind of set it off. Out of all these things that you've mentioned, which we're moving, we're talking about the political arena, about technology. What's one thing that just what is the top? Does is it
Yeah, so from a personal standpoint, I think what has happened in Gaza with the deaths of over 45,000 people uh,
okay?
has been the darkest moment of 2024, and effectively this has happened throughout the year.
Okay.
Me growing up, I have never encountered a direct genocide. So I always thought that genocides are like happened way back in the day, and I always wondered like when the genocides of the past were happening, what were people doing? What were politicians of different countries doing? What was their attempts to stop it?
So do you think that the media has been sort of covering this up or putting it in a way? And I mean, the mass media has been losing trust with the people so much, especially recently. So do you think that they haven't been?
I think more than the media, what has happened, Antonio, is we all have become desensitized to what is happening.
Yeah.
So something that remains on top of the news for 1 day, 2 day, 3 day, you have the attention. But if it's same thing is getting repeated day over day for 365 days, what happens is even if the news is right in front of you, you kind of skip it, you scroll it down, and you look at what are the other news that is happening in the world. And I think that is what has happened with the Gaza. With every day you read, 40 people dead, 50 people dead, 100 people dead, and it's staggering because for the world's superpowers, why does it take such a long time to eliminate a small faction of people who don't even have an entity, who don't even have a state, who don't even have banks, who don't have any sort of financial capability to get these weapons or anything? So unless it is an intentional way of killing people and covering it up, I don't see a point that this war should have lasted for over a year. And I don't even sometimes find it very odd to call it as an or as a war, because I see it as a very one-sided thing, with one side being armed by the best powers in the world or the most advanced powers in the world, and the
And the other
other
side is
side
basically defenseless almost.
defenseless and throwing a stick.
Yeah.
So why does it take you know the people?
What do you think should happen? What should 2025? What should the people push for? How does this? how does this become a situation that's solvable? What's next?
Solutions are always there right in front of us. I think the problem is with the leadership, and there's always people trying to protect their own interests, people trying to project their own image, and those are the kind of people that will push us towards wars and challenges that ordinary people have to suffer.
Hmm.
Whether it is Gaza, whether it is Ukraine, I think the solutions are right in front of us. It's just a bunch of politicians across the world sitting together. And so just like they elect the Pope, where they are not supposed to come out of the room until the Pope is selected, whenever there is this kind of a crisis, whenever more than 100 people die for any kind of crisis, internationally we should all come to a common ground that we need to put these politicians in a room and not let them come outside until they arrive at a solution,
Right. Right.
because that's how you can solve things. As long as they're outside and they're making some comments, and then they're like, and they have all these military powers, they're going to just keep using it until that image that they have about themselves is projected in the world.
And it seems like that. I mean, look at the war with Ukraine, right? Like Russia is slowly owning more and more different areas in the Ukraine, and it's like if you don't seek a peace deal, you're just going to lose more and more land. You have both of these wars going on simultaneously. It's like we need to find solutions. What would be your sort of conclusion on this topic? What would you like to see?
I like to see the conflict end. I like to see people living happily. I like to see genocides not happening.
Right?
And
No,
I like to
absolutely.
see some level of accountability with the people who have been blessed with power.
Yeah. Right.
I always think that whenever a community, a nation gets power, it's a blessing. But it can turn into a curse if you use that power for a wrong purpose. And
Right.
it will have a significant impact on the next generations.
Yeah. Yeah. Because people hold on to that. Their parents, cousins, they go through that. And those stories
Yeah.
remain with people. You're not going to exterminate the country, right? So people will walk with that, and people remember.
Every time a crime against humanity happens, people don't forget. The historians don't forget. The victims don't get to write the history. It's the other way around. It's always the victims who will own the history.
Yeah.
And dehumanizing people and committing war crimes or committing genocides, these won't be forgotten so soon. And people will reflect on that. People will reflect on what are the rest of the people doing and why this happened, why humans, in an age where there's artificial intelligence and everything is getting recorded, why is it so hard for the people to come together and come to a solution over the table?
Yeah. I hear you. I hear you. I think a very important set of points here that you've listed out, and I think that ultimately we do want peace in the world. I mean, that's this is in some. It seems like there's so many interests behind these wars that the continuing on of them, there's something aside from it. Why haven't we already found a solution? Why hasn't there been peace? What's stopping that right now? Like this deep in already.
And
Awesome.
with regard to the Ukraine war, one of the interesting things that I see now is the tables started turning when North Korean troops started coming to the front lines.
Hmm.
I think that's a it's a very calculated risk that Putin has taken to kind of engage North Korean troops to fight. And I think it will have some global repercussions.
Yeah, I mean we're walking into a new presidency, right? And so in the United States, so things we're about to see how. I mean, the idea is the de-escalation of many of these wars and peace, and prosperity and economically, not just within the country but globally. And so, piecing that together and what that looks like. There's been a lot of peace talks, but no concrete solutions implemented just yet. So hopefully, yeah, hopefully we're walking into a time of more peace. Speaking of the new presidency, what's your take on Donald Trump? What are you thinking he's going to bring to the table? How do you feel about him winning the presidency?
The US elections always are way most watched after elections in the world. because there's so many global policies are dependent on in which direction US would take,
Yeah.
given the superpower status of US and the need of dollar and dollar being the currency of the trade across the globe. As long as that remains.
So speaking of the currency, speaking of the reserve currency, BRICS was catching some hype, but it seems this hype seems to have died down, in my opinion. How do you feel about that sort of competition? Do you see that maybe if peace talks are brought to the table, do you see that there will be maybe the
Not the
the
right
dollar
time. Not the right
maybe
time.
I'm sorry?
I don't think that the timing is right for the BRICS to have its own currency.
Yeah, it doesn't seem it seems like it died down a bit, and if there's peace talks, it's almost like we're gonna walk back into the dollar for now. To me it seems that way. What do you
Yeah,
feel about that?
I think the BRICS as an organization still is still not as tightly bonded as, say, Europe is,
Hmm.
so that they can have a common currency. Europeans have been, I mean, it's not like Europeans always has been together. They have fought like crazy wars and killed
For
each other,
sure.
killed millions of people about 100 years ago. But at
Hmm.
least now there's fair amount of peace among those countries, and there's no border patrolling or closed borders at least. But with BRICS, you have India and China who are still, competing on a lot of things. You have other nations like Brazil, which has not much of ties with the Asian side. So it's still, it's I sometimes feel BRICS is more like a huge landmass put together, but not actually connected, both
Right.
from political, ideological, or economic front. So it's too early. It's more.
It is very early. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, it seems like it was like almost like a de-risk to the dollar, and now it's sort of died down, but it's in its premature stages, and
I think
whatever
I
that
think the biggest risk to the dollar is not from the BRICS or from anything else, but from Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies.
really. So talk to me about that. Like okay, so they say like the dollar or currency in general around the world is backed by gold, but you can't if you have a lot of you can't carry gold around just in case something collapses, right? You can't just throw it in the back and take it with you. I mean, if you have a little bit, but what happens if you have a lot? Storing it, security, there's a lot there. So how do you feel? How does that look like? When does that sort of make that intersection? What does that look like for you?
Yes, since my childhood, whenever I've studied about currencies, I think a gold-backed currency always made sense. In fact, I'm a coin collector. I collect coins from the past. I have over 5,000 coins as part of my collection.
Okay.
And I have read the history of the coins, and I believe that eventually the gold based currency is the way to go for the world, because ultimately what you own in the hand is an actual value, not a piece of paper that is issued by some bank or some government whose legitimacy can be questioned.
But it really doesn't it. I mean, you're just now all you're saying is, it's backed by a bank, but rather it's some rock that we all agree on. It's at the end of the day just more than the actual item that it's backed up. It's a community sort of agreement that this has value and we're all going to give it that value. It's more of an agreement. So it's not necessarily the rock that's gold or maybe some bank or some it's really an agreement amongst the people to say, "Hey, this has value." So why, what is
Utility of the gold always will create a value for that substance.
right? So we talk about funny things of like excavation of like, maybe going to other planets or excavation of asteroids and what happens if we find
Of course,
thousands of pounds of gold and does that balance out? And so I mean at
when
the
it
end of the day,
happens,
like, okay,
when that happens, but it's very hypothetical that
it
that
is.
it's going to happen, right? What if we just
But what's
find like ferrum or find like some other material but not gold? So there's so many possibilities. But what I feel is that I think I don't have a scientific evidence to that, but why did people choose gold as a standard
it's
prehistoric?
It's the funny part about this conversation because they're, you're trying to give it reason, and what I'm ultimately saying, and if we think about it, it's just an agreed upon value source that we've said, okay, we're all gonna believe this.
It has remained scarce throughout the history. People would have thought 5,000 years ago that they're going to find mountains of gold, but it hasn't happened. It has remained scarce throughout the history. Men have always been fascinated by gold. Women have been fascinated by gold. There have been wars that have fought for gold. That amazing element of desire.
So, what is the risk to the dollar? You're saying that Bitcoin is the risk to the dollar. How do you see that?
In the current scheme of things in the world, I think Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies are like a danger to the dollar.
Mhm.
Because see, the actual reasoning I find is there are two core reasons why people want crypto or people want some alternate mechanisms. Number one is to avoid taxes. The moment you're choosing dollar as a currency, unless you're somehow getting loads of currency in hand, and then you're doing like a direct hand-to-hand cash transfer to do any sort of banking means, you are incurring taxes. And in a lot of areas in the world, taxes are a significant expenditure. So with crypto, you can kind of figure out a way to avoid those taxes, because there is that whole angle of being for doing an anonymous transaction.
Like
So that's
decentralized, yeah.
decentralized anonymous transaction. So that's number one. Number two is, you know, why making the world aware of certain transaction that has even happened. And as we speak, there might have been many transactions that have happened between, say, Russians and other entities, but we don't even know about it, because as long as they don't go through the mainstream banking channels, there's no way for the world to even be aware that such a transaction or such a deal has happened. So,
So
so
do you
I think,
feel like the governments would have to implement more strict rules about how the distribution, I mean, it would defeat the purpose of itself, right? Because it is a decentralized system that would then become monitored and audited by different governments in order to prevent people evading taxes, essentially. So, you know,
yeah, but I think at some point of time, people will start questioning the tax system itself. It is an hypothetical man-made system where the government somehow is like able to impose on people and get away with that. In US, I'm sure 30% taxes you guys pay. We pay about 30% taxes in India. And then if you add up like other taxes like GST and others, we end up paying almost 50% of our income to the government. So that's like 50% of the time any individual is working, they're working
right,
for. And
right.
so what happens is then a lot of intellectual talent of the country starts focusing on how do you reduce the taxes. That's why
Hmm.
you have people who study at top business schools, they end up becoming tax consultants, or
Hmm.
some financial firm that offers this financial advising kind of services. So
Right.
it's sort of ridiculous kind of system that we have created, which brings in so much of inefficiency. So I think some level of currency related efficiency is needed in the world.
I agree. I agree with that. And I think that it's true. And so we have these tax systems, in different countries that, represent a large portion of, our time. And so we're dedicating that time, and it would be good. And we were talking about this in our last podcast about transparency with government to see, not only do you not know where the money is being spent, it's like you're working and contributing to this. And it's like, there's so many disconnects. So it's a real problem around the world. And it would be interesting to see how this evolves. So, how do you think maybe AI could play into this?
I think the issue is not with the AI. It's the issue with governments not choosing to adopt any sort of technology to reduce this. Because if you take, like, say, if a group of people say they have $100, and the sales tax is, say, 12%, and those, say, the group has about 10 people, and they just do trade among themselves, and if they rotate that $100 among themselves and do about 10 to 15 transactions, they end up losing their entire net
Right.
wealth to the
Yeah.
government. because
right? Because you're
everything had
taxed when you get it, you're taxed when you buy it, you're taxed when you receive it. It's taxed so many times throughout the
so many
cycle. It
times.
does.
And with this inflation, what's happening is ultimately this is going to happen. So, and this problem, I don't know why the best brains in the world are not bringing it up.
So here's a funny little jump into another topic I'm going to make here. And so, we've been sort of in this sort of we're sort of in a post-COVID era. It seems like COVID has just disappeared off the map. What do you think that really was? How do you feel about that?
So Antonio, I had similar kind of doubts that this whole COVID is, a kind of a scam. But I just want to share a backstory. I was affected by COVID in
Hmm.
2021, and I was in ICU for about 5 days and overall hospitalized about 8 days. When I was hospitalized, India was going through the peak of second wave of COVID, and the situation was extremely worse. Getting a
Okay.
hospital bed, unless you are in the top 5% of the population and able to afford it, then only you could get it. And my whole family, me, my mother, and my father, we all three were hospitalized, and we had to effectively spend close to $50,000 in US currency to just recover out of COVID and get those hospital beds. We could do so because we could afford, but not many people were able to afford. And the oxygen, what I felt was that during entire COVID, if the government had made oxygen free of cost at every hospital for the patients, it could have significantly reduced the deaths. But oxygen was such a scarce quantity at that time, and people were not able to breathe, and oxygen was something that was only available at the hospitals, and the hospital had to could pump that oxygen into the lungs. It saved a lot of people.
Hmm.
Until that point, I always thought that COVID is something like hyped up. But when I just stopped breathing at point out, my lungs were just not functional, and I was like breathing, but I was not able to feel any energy, and I was just so I did like realize that it is something strange. I felt it's like a man-made virus that just made human body not function.
But we see what's crazy is you look at the statistics now, and there's all of these different, and it evolved into several different names and so on and so forth. And we see that there's no cases anymore. And then what we noticed was that the COVID year over year would show incredible amount of cases, and the flu, which normally would have in the millions of cases a year, dropped to
So
much less, like less than a.
I think what has happened is number one, uh, and I did a lot of research post this, and I might have a very maybe my conclusions are wrong, but what I post COVID, I did a lot of research on what has happened now, I mean, what this virus, coronavirus has been there in the world for the long time. People have built various type of coronaviruses in the past. This one was of a particular variant that has, I could be lab created, could be because of wild animal and human consumption of wild animals, could be one of the reasons. There is a small possibility of that, but I think vast probability is towards it being a lab grown and somehow leaked in the public space. But what I also think is that I also looked at various pandemics that have happened in the past. Every 100 years, there has been some pandemic that has spread in the world and wiped out a set of population. And the pattern that we have observed with this pandemic has been very similar to the previous pandemics. The pandemics appear, and a good portion of the people get wiped out. The countries and the regions go in a lockdown, but eventually people will start getting immunity to face that problem, and the pandemic dies out.
Do you think that the COVID shots served purpose?
So that's a debatable topic.
Seems like there's a lot of people who suffered from myocarditis. So the myocarditis cases skyrocketed globally. People dropping dead. That seems very strange, and it didn't seem to cure or prevent. It seemed like it was almost like a test trial that, in my opinion, somewhat failed.
Yeah,
What
I
do you
think
think about that?
I think the rush to create a vaccine and the whole miscommunication around the vaccine, that somehow, once you are vaccinated, you're immune to all these problems. I think there was a massive paid campaign that has happened.
But does it tell you a lot about human beings? Does it tell you a lot about psychology, mass media, and how
But
people kind of accept what they're told? It was like something that was
I think
pushed on everybody.
throughout the history, humans have always been driven by greed whenever there is an opportunity. There have been people who have, when there is a misery around the world, there have always been people who have chosen to make profits out of it.
So it seems as if this was a profit-based solution that wasn't it's a very strange dynamic what happened, and how people believed it, and how cults, people would go into either yes or no, and it was this fight, and it was like, if you don't do it, you're shouldn't be a part of society, and people are being outcasted. And
That's the panic that people always create for any sort of problem, right? It's and I think what happened was, even during the start of the first wave, this was the first time where the entire world found themselves, at least since the day of in the age of internet, literally everybody in the world felt helpless. This is the very first time. Things have happened in small portions of the world, but never has been a situation where literally the entire world is being absolutely helpless.
yeah.
We talk about scientific progress, we talk about big pharmaceutical companies and all that, but nobody had a solution when the first wave of COVID came. The country
Mm.
is going into lockdown. That's such a massive thing,
It's such a
right?
big decision because you stopped economies, you
Yeah,
broke businesses. Assets were really cheap. I mean, strategically, if you look at it, if it was planned and there was some sort of master plan behind it, it would seem like it gets loose, the economies drop, short the market, sell solutions,
yeah.
buy up cheap assets, let the market skyrocket again. You just rugged the whole world.
And in densely populated countries like India, the situation is pretty bad.
Hmm.
I have, I was seeing, like, just on my WhatsApp list, every day I was sending condolences messages to almost 20-25 people every day.
Yeah, that's crazy. That's
And it never happened. And in fact, this might sound very, and I guess this also describes the reality of life. I literally had a message, a condolences
saved,
message I had written,
right?
and I was just copying and pasting. It's so sad, but when you keep writing it, and I was just, I guess a lot of people are doing that, but those were the number of deaths that have happened in just.
But how did it stop is my question. What happened? What
But
happened that it just
no,
it
so
just
what
died out?
happened?
People develop natural immunity. That seemed to be
That seems the case. People develop natural immunity, and it has happened with cholera. It has happened with plagues. It has happened with various other kind of poxes that have occurred in the past. Throughout the last 2,000, 3,000 years documented history, you find that pandemics have happened in
so.
various
Let's
countries, and the spread
go
was
ahead.
not so much because people did not have aeroplanes and stuff to travel so quickly from one region to another. The only other means was, the caravans either would have traveled on road, or the ships would have arrived. And there are so many cases throughout the history where ships were stopped at the ports and
Right.
not allowed for the people to enter. These are documented in the history. So
Hmm.
people did try to stop the spread of any sort of pandemic by stopping the transportation systems.
Hmm.
But this was the first time in the last 60, 70 years where air travel has become so frequent and people are traveling from one country to another on literally on a daily basis. It's almost impossible to
Stop
stop
the
this.
spread. Yeah, 100%. I'm gonna shift this a bit, and I'm gonna jump into, I think, a really cool and controversial topic, and it's Neuralink. It's that first case of Neuralink being implemented in somebody's brain, and them being able to, I think, play video games. A paraplegic be able to play video games just with thought, play chess and different things. What do you see in the future of that? It seems for me, and I'll just kind of give you a rundown of what I think is like, it seems controversial in a sense that it's like, okay, we're going to implant this chip. It's beautiful that we can, do certain bodily functions through the mind, perhaps help people start walking, or incapacitated people do certain things. There seems to be a negative side of that too, because imagine if that sort of control can work the opposite way. What happens if the owner of this company or somebody decides to tinker with this device and push it to do something that it's not supposed to be doing? What do you feel about Neuralink? What's the future of that? Are you scared, or does it make you excited?
So I've done a little bit of study again on Neuralink, and I came across few other research articles. What they described was that experiments on connecting human brain with the devices have been happening since 1950.
Okay.
Majority of these experiments have happened in secrecy, either funded by the governments or private organizations, but all of them have kept it extremely secret. So it only
Hmm.
took like decades for these kind of research papers to come out, or those research to be published publicly. Otherwise, when the experiments fail, they kind of not reveal it.
Okay.
So Neuralink, just like with several of Elon Musk's ventures, has gone public about what they're doing. They have published some level of research on what kind of experiments that they're doing. That's a very, I think that's definitely in a positive direction, and it kind of removes the whole stigma associated with modifying human brain or making changes to the human anatomy in a way.
It would be really great if you didn't necessarily have to implement the chip. It would be really great if it was something that, you could maybe put on the head, or something external that can be removed that's not attached to. And I guess, through time, those innovations will come about. What really kind of freaks me out is the idea that you have to implant something in your brain.
Inside the
That's like,
brain.
in order to get it out, a whole process needs to go be about. And so that's an
But some of these researchers would say that it is as simple as somebody having a fake tooth. Humans have been implanting fake tooths from
Yeah, but a
centuries.
tooth doesn't it does solve a scenario, and it does allow you to, I guess, bite into X food and eat it, and serves purpose to a process. But it seems a little bit more dangerous to implement a chip in your brain that can alter something in a positive direction. But I also believe that it can probably alter in another way. The tooth can't really do much else than serve that one purpose, right?
No, but okay. So how do you compare that with people do a piercing for a ear or a nose,
But
where
that's
where you are
different.
altering human
But
anatomy?
a piercing is a decoration. It doesn't do anything specifically. This chip is actually helping you arrive and do something that you weren't able to do before through your brain. It's sending waves, or I don't know exactly how it works, but it's doing something. And so what I'm saying ultimately is, if it's doing that and it's able to successfully allow you to communicate with a computer and move things, couldn't other scenarios exist that could negatively affect you?
Agreed. I'm not able to recollect the scientific name, but there is an implant that you do for a heart where
Okay.
it pumps
Helps
the
you
thing.
palpitate, the palpitator. Yep.
Yeah. So
Yeah. Right.
that's
So you can make it palpitate faster and give somebody, a heart attack, for example. That is yeah.
so there have
There's
been devices. There have been devices like that. So not the first time we are doing.
It's not. It's not. It's scary. Where we're going with this ultimately is, I proposed the solution where it's, hey, it would be really cool if there was a device that maybe you could wear externally that could have the same function and still serve the purpose without you having to get brain surgery and the chip implanted. But then my following thought on that is, well, if there's an external device that can do this, it can control or help you arrive at some sort of performance that you weren't able to do before, it could possibly make you do other things. And that technology would then be scary as well. I'm just with the positive aspect of these innovative type technologies that can help. I believe that there's also another side of it that could sway you to do something maybe that you didn't want to do, or whatever that may be. And so there is a risk factor to all these new innovations and technologies. And as we're accepting them as common tools that are going to help the majority of, or a large portion of the population, have these extra skills, more and more it becomes adopted. And so if we walk into an interview in, let's say, 2035, and I have a chip in my head and I'm able to recall data much quicker than the average human being, and I'm able to recite that and access, and with the usage of LLMs and perhaps more sophisticated artificial intelligence, I'm going to be well ahead of that next person. And so it's going to create an environment of, if you don't become a cyborg, you will not compete in the market. And so there's a lot of very interesting sort of, woo-woo topics here that we're getting into, but at the same time that it shows innovation and incredible breakthroughs and possibilities for humans, I also believe that there's a huge risk factor, and it's scary for me in particular. So,
So, Antonio, I think one of the another significant things that have happened in 2024, and we can talk a little bit on this, is the toppling of Assad regime in Syria.
okay,
And there are two reasons why I think it's a very significant event. The
okay,
number one is that that particular family has ruled Syria for over 50 years.
wow, okay,
Yeah. And in those last 50 years, there have been various movements within Syria to kind of topple the regime, but nothing to an extent that what we have seen in last decade or so. But toppling a regime that has existed for 50 years is a significant event, and
can I
Syria is.
ask you can I ask you a question, just to give me and our audience a little bit of context? So for the last 50 years, you had a regime in place in Syria that was ruling in a certain manner. From your perspective, was that positive? Was it negative? What was going on? Can you kind of define that period of time? What happened? Why that's good or bad, and where you see that going?
Yeah. So I had a friend, a Syrian friend, when I used to work at Microsoft Seattle offices, and he used to tell me that, and this was 2007, even before 2008, 2009 timeframe, where the Syrian revolution has not even, started. And so he used to, we used to go to prayers sometimes together, share a ride, and he used to give me a lot of insights about, the Syrian way of life, and they're very hospitable people, very kind, very passionate about food, just like
Okay, right.
any cultural society.
Hmm.
What he was telling was that there was this small group of people who are considered as the ruling elite in Syria, and
Hmm.
they have engaged thousands and of spies across the country, and where any sort of dissent, any sort of criticism to the ruling elite, you're thrown into this torture camps that they have, and that's how they have ruled for 5 decades.
Wow. Okay.
So
So
he was
not so
like,
positive.
yeah, and he was like, even when he's working in US, he is afraid to openly criticize certain things because he still has family members back in Syria. And so I could see that. And when I went and started reading up about Syria, and even at the time, I could see a lot about it written. But what happened was, when the Syrian revolution started to happen, and there was a civil war, and people wanted to rise against the existing government, there was this interference from multiple superpowers. So you had Iran interfering, and Russia interfering, and then you have US, you had some NATO forces as well. So between 2014 till 2024, almost, all these different entities from outside tried everything possible to topple the regime.
Okay.
And the realization was that it just resulted into a deadlock. It didn't, solve the problem. And what happened was, in 2024, because of the Ukraine war, a vacuum was created where all these big powers that were, trying to outsmart each other, their attention diverted to Ukraine. The Russian troops were all started getting engaged in Ukraine. Iran was also like sort of getting into conflict with Israel, and they were, their attention was also diverted, and the locals essentially toppled the whole regime. And in a matter of about 11 days, the whole regime collapsed.
So is it safe to say that the locals were afraid of revolting against the regime that ruled for 5 decades, and finally they became fed up? Nobody else from the exterior could break it. Finally, they got fed up, and within a matter of days, the community itself
It has
performed a revolution.
happened. So the background is that, and I might be a little bit off with the timeline here. So when the revolution started about a decade back, the rebels were able to take over almost 60% of the territory
Hmm.
from the government forces. And that's when the government started taking help of external, forces.
Okay.
And that's when, the Iran, the Russians, the US, and all these other entities started joining in. And the moment they joined in, the rebels were crushed. The air power of US, the air power of Russia, and all that. So, and ultimately, the rebel faction, they lost territory. The capital city and the main cities were still held by the government. That's the regime. So when the attention was diverted, so another aspect here is that no amount of money can create a fighting force that will be able to stand up against a popular movement among people.
And that's a very important. There's something you said there is incredibly important. That phrase right there, like when people as a group meet up and team up to fight a cause and create a revolution, there's nothing that can stop that.
They can stop them. And so with all this, US backed militias, or the Iranian backed militias, or Russian backed militias, and Turkish backed militias, none of them were able to win this war. It just
Hmm.
went into a deadlock because they were essentially funded by these foreign governments. And the locals who really had this vision, who had this ideological thought process that they want to create a self rule, they were the ones that eventually took over. Now, one can judge from an historical standpoint, are these good people, bad people, whether their way of thinking is aligned with, say, the thinking of Russians or Americans or Iranians. But ultimately, these are the local people. And
Right.
you have to, so yeah, and as long as they are like, they are committed to the cause, external funding will not be able to defeat them. And it's it has become very, very obvious in the case of Syria. But also, what I was fascinated, which is coming to the second point about this whole Syrian toppling of the regime that has happened. I was amazed at the way they have conducted the whole PR campaign in the last 20 days since they have toppled the government. In less than 20 days, you have the Americans landing in Damascus, you have Russians landing, you have Jordanians, Qatar's, NATO forces. I mean, literally all these different countries are able to come and have conversation. They have invited journalists across the globe. You have all the Western media, you have Eastern media. So they somehow have figured out a textbook example of how, when you topple a regime, what you need to do to reduce the fears of rest of the people.
Right, which can create sort of a domino effect in the world, right? So if a group of people, or there's a particular regime in play that the people don't want, and in this case, for 50 years it's been in play, that you can, as a country, unite, overthrow,
Yeah.
and that creates then what you're explaining is more prosperity within the country. Conversations are open, people are landing, things are happening. So now an economy can now build, and now there's more prosperity within the country.
Yeah, so it's a pretty significant effect because Syria is actually, it connects Middle East, it connects Asia and Europe. So it's Turkey and Syria, that region
Very
is
centrally located in that area.
strategic. And Syria as a country, Damascus as a city has been civilized since 10,000 years and is one of
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
the capitals in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's pretty significant that what has happened there in 2024.
Yeah. Wow. Oh, amazing. It sounds thank you for contextualizing that and bringing that together. And I think, again, and I'll repeat it, but a very great point about how, if things aren't going the way that, the people are being benefited in their current situation, that the power of numbers of people, because, proportionate, amount of people versus politicians are always overwhelmingly and much larger than the amount of politicians. So the people ultimately have the say, and it's to the people and for the people. And the bureaucracies and these sort of governments that are trying to instill their ways and being very greedy about it, they can't possibly exist for very long if the word gets out and if there is transparency. So very important. So another thing, go ahead. Well, I want to kind of deviate again because I think that you've touched on a lot of great things, and I feel we're
Go
on a
ahead, go
roll.
ahead, go ahead.
But so there's one topic that's really interesting, that's robotic. And so we see, we are now walking into, we've seen the amount of companies, trying to bring together. And there's a lot of really, there's Boston Dynamics and companies that, we've heard of that have been around, but there's maybe hundreds, if not thousands, of companies in Asia, especially China, that's very on the forefront of the innovation of robotics. What are you seeing? What do you see in the future of robotics? I mean, I think robotics is going to be a part of our everyday life very soon. How is that progressing? And who do you see as a leader in the markets? I mean, the media shows us, the different American companies, I guess, from my perspective, but, the world's a big place. A lot of things are happening. And from our conversation a couple of days ago, there was something about China that you felt, very, very strongly about. You want to talk a little bit more in depth about that and share your opinion?
I think from a 2024 standpoint, robotics is still in fancy. It's still under development, I would say. There hasn't been anything of considerable importance that has happened in 2024. But I have seen videos from China where the robotic dogs are helping the police agencies, and they also have this circular robot that they are using to kind of catch criminals, petty criminals on the roads.
Hmm.
But this could be like very selected police departments that are using that for an experimental purpose,
Hmm.
then mainstream rollout across the nation. But industrial robots have really taken off. There's a lot of Indian companies that are going to China to purchase this massive industrial robots that
Hmm.
do like six-dimensional movements, and that's something that's really taking off from an industrial standpoint.
Okay.
But I think the mainstream robots is I think we're a few years away.
Yeah. Yeah. It's coming. It's coming close.
Yep.
It's something that I'm excited about. I'm excited about, but we've all seen the movie Terminator, but I'm excited about it. Okay.
There
Well,
is bit of exaggeration, and it makes a good movie, but no.
well, we never, we never. I mean, imagine having thousands or millions of robots, crawling around, walking around, as part of everyday society. You know what I mean? With the movement and AI and all of these innovations. There's a lot coming our way. I'm excited for the future, but I think there's a lot of security that needs to be put in play as well.
Yeah, Antonio, can you pause this for
I have 17% battery on my phone, by the way. So awesome. So I was gonna jump into a topic that's been incredibly popular for like the last week, and it's this whole H1B visa cap removal. Right now, currently the H1B visas are capped at 85,000 annually, and there's proposals to remove that cap to boost U.S. competitiveness. What's your take on that? What do you feel, being Indian, from the Indian perspective? What's that looking like for you? That the majority of the H1s are from India.
Yeah, so I have been following the Twitter debate just like a lot of Indians very, very actively.
Yeah, yeah,
So the
yeah.
first thing, I just want to be very, I want to. So I was disheartened by some comments which were extremely racist.
Horrible. It's bullshit. Yeah.
And I think the world does not have a place for racism, at least in this era. Whatever things that have happened in the past, those, we all have learned from those lessons. And I think any sort of racism against any population in the world is extremely hurtful and condemnable. So I was
Agreed, 100%.
by some of those comments.
And apologies on behalf of American people. I think that people are upset. I think in general, I don't think people are upset specifically at Indians, but I think that people are just upset that we saw the Vivek Ramaswamy quote where he just basically laughs at the American culture, and that creates anger, and people then go to the extreme, unfortunately, and it's sad to see that we live in a world today where this kind of extremity and racism exists in this way. It's poor. It's not a tasteful approach, and we need to really step out of that. But really, like identifying the core problem is,
Yeah. So
how
I
do we
definitely
balance that?
thought when I read Vivek Ramaswamy's quote, I thought that was below the belt. It was written with uh, it. I mean, he is a very articulate man, and I think that tweet of his was not up to the standards that he himself holds.
Agreed.
If I'm an American kid, I would have felt hurt
Hmm.
by that tweet. And then Elon Musk's subsequent reaction to it, as if he completely defends and he will go to war. I think that further angered American people, and I think so. I think, but to this debate, I feel there are multiple dimensions to this.
Okay.
The first and foremost dimension that I see is that H1B is is right now a form of exploitation by the tech sector, and Indian employees that are availing this facility, they're just the victims of it.
Yeah.
They are essentially working at a lower cost compared to citizens of other countries who are availing H1B.
Yeah.
In the tech sector is literally exploiting this, and that's where the real accountability should be there,
Hmm.
right? What is letting these companies hire this talent from India at so low cost and defend the program? There should be some caps that if maybe a $200,000 salary cap that if you want H1Bs who are supposed to be the best talent that is coming out of other countries, then the companies have to shell out $200,000, and you will immediately see that these companies that are advocating H1B will back off.
But don't you feel like, and I always say this, like, don't ever underestimate the ingenuity of a human being, and I say this in a way that, if there's such strict policy around H1Bs and they make it that the salaries have to be above a certain level and X, Y, and Z, wouldn't you see the people find another way, perhaps just outsource directly? Or that's why maybe companies create facilities in different countries.
So the question then becomes, if a work can be outsourced, why be so particular about doing it in the US?
There's certain fields that, yes, it can be done virtually. Probably, maybe some people may believe that it's more effective done in person,
We,
present at
we
the
are living in a
location.
world past COVID where people have worked from homes, even in the United States. So anything that can be done remotely should be done remotely.
Right.
It doesn't make sense to just so when we are connecting people over internet, you're talking about few milliseconds latency. That's all. So somebody say sitting in a California office and somebody sitting in a New York office and somebody sitting in Hyderabad, you're just talking about few milliseconds of latency.
So,
So
I mean, essentially what we're saying is, let's turn on a bunch of cameras, leave them on. Everybody's from 9 to 5. We have our camera on. Everybody's interacting, and we're basically virtually present.
you can just have a massive projector in the office on and project the people of different parts of the world, and you can still feel very much connected. So I don't see that as a challenge. The other part of the debate which I dig deeper, and why there is this backlash against Indians, what I felt was that there were comments that were coming repeatedly. This number one comment which I felt was often repeated, was, once you bring in an Indian in a high level position, then he kind of replaces the rest of the people with other set of Indians.
Okay.
Um, and that comment is repeated by multiple times, including few prominent influencers have also highlighted the comment. I tend to agree with that. I have seen that multiple times with multiple companies in my almost 2 decades of software experience, and it happens. And I think that needs to be opposed.
So there
And
needs to
it's
be essentially a program in reverse.
I
So
think
like the diversity programs that they have where they do hiring and they select.
holding the IT companies to certain level of diversity is very important. I think generally when in IT industry, when we talk about diversity, it's more spoken in terms of male female ratio, because
Hmm.
there are so few women in the tech field. But often we tend to ignore that there has to be a diversity of multiple ethnicities, because as you build multinationals, there's so much of value that different groups can bring to the table. And I often had this complaint even when I worked for Microsoft as well, that I always wanted the Microsoft India office to have more number of foreigners inside the office, because that will bring a different perspective. When Indians in US advocate that getting top talent from India helps American economy, they should rigorously also advocate that bringing top talent into India
Yeah,
from other countries will
of
also
course.
help Indian economy, and it will
Yeah.
also help our country become better from an infrastructure standpoint or from a overall planning and
And
point of view.
it begs the question, why don't most countries adopt this sort of approach on bringing top talent from other countries? Why is, if you go to any other country, there nobody's looking to hire Americans or to hire Europeans, or they're hiring locally, and that's it.
Yeah,
They're not. There's no.
even in an earlier podcast on immigration, I kind of touched upon the two highest earning groups in United States. One is Indians and other is Filipinos. And and when you search for the comments from the Filipino and Indian immigrants in the United States, are they advocating similar kind of immigration in their home countries?
Right, and it's
Are they
not.
advocating that India needs to hire foreign nationals to kind of advance its infrastructure or advance some of the tech companies that we have built? Or same thing with the Filipino. I don't find that.
You don't
And
find
I
that.
think,
That's what is, I think where you're going with this, and I could be wrong, but this is what makes for global products, right? The diverse idea and understanding of how something should be marketed and promoted and created could then be versus a global product versus a local product, and that's super important. That perspective diversity is super important in the world. Sorry, you were I interrupted you. Continue.
I think in the last couple of years, or at least last 5 6 years, the salaries in India have substantially gone up in the tech sector. $100,000 earning $100,000 in India itself has become fairly common.
Hmm.
And I think if the Indian companies choose to, they can actually hire a lot of foreign talent into India as well. And that will create a much more diversity in Indian companies, and hopefully that will lead to Indian companies building products that will work substantially well in global markets. And it will also try to reduce down this gap that has happened. This whole Twitter debate in last 5 years has pretty much brought things that was discussed in closed rooms
To
out
the
in
public.
public, right?
So my question to you, yeah, and my question to you is, do you think that because of the diversity, that is why America leads in companies around the world? That's why the most innovative companies and the most innovative products do come out of America. Is that, yeah, it's the diversity.
Yeah, absolutely. I,
Mm.
I, that diversity helps a lot. It brings a different perspective. It you know it makes critical thinking very common. It reduces groupthink. There are a lot of advantages of just having a diverse team. I again touched upon in one of our previous podcasts that the fundamental difference I found in Microsoft US office and Microsoft India office was that the US office was extremely diverse, and that helped in some of the best products of Microsoft being built there compared to a more of support kind of work that happens in India offices. That if you want to build some amazing products out of India offices, we got to have this diversity of
Yeah.
people from various ethnicities.
This is something for the world to hear. The diversity does allow for different perspective. The
Yeah,
closed box thinking of a culture can prevent you from thinking, in a different way that can open up, different opportunities. So it's very important to have these brainstorms with individuals that not only think differently, but that come from different cultures, that are brought up differently, have a different standard, and that communication and that ideation can lead to beautiful ideas and perspective
yeah.
to
So,
ultimately.
so diversity is a two-way street. So, the people who are able to get into, these top roles and utilizing diversity as an umbrella, they cannot, once they get in, they should hold themselves to a very high bar and not reduce the existing diversity in those organizations.
Right.
Because this whole criticism that is coming across, that once you bring in an Indian CEO or an Indian C-level executive, he tends to replace everyone else with Indians. This whole criticism will go away if that Indian CEO holds himself to that diversity goals.
Right. The very reason he's at that position is because that was implemented before him. So the intelligent thing would be to continue this sort of philosophy of diversity and perspective and growth, and not get stuck in sort of this reversal of roles that, we're back to square one.
Yeah.
That's
Other
quite
thing,
interesting.
as I said, it's very important for all these Indian executives who have made it big in the United States to also advocate for the need for immigrants in India, especially talented immigrants in India, to come and work in the companies and startups that Indians are starting, and
Yeah.
also push the governments to have lesser regulation in terms of hiring, in terms of the visa process. Because once you have a reciprocal process where both the countries are having like a similar kind of laws in terms of people from US can come into India and work, and Indians can go to US and work, I think it will create a world of opportunities. I mean, there are 1.4 billion people in India, and
Right.
that's a huge human capital, and a lot of wonders can be achieved with that kind of human capital. So I think if the India is also able to get like a good number of US citizens coming here and looking at the problems that we have, and giving a kind of new perspective to solving these problems, I think it can bring a huge global change.
And yeah, we talked about this on our immigration podcast, the idea of like having a global immigration system that would allow for the move and go of different of people that wanted to go and explore the world. And there's many people that want to travel, that want to learn about new countries, that have certain skill sets or want to develop certain skill sets, that if there was some sort of a program that was easily, they can easily be enrolled and get the benefits that people from other countries get when they come to the United States, that would be really amazing, and it would expand and allow for probably, more maturity and perspective and growth globally, which is something that we should be heading towards. So I think that this is, a fantastic idea. Abu, any other topics that inspire you, or that kind of come to head before we wrap up?
Next topic I want to touch upon is the worldwide scale adoption of AI that has happened in 2024. I think in 2023 with the Chat GPT, I think the people were just waking up. People were like, okay, this is a new fancy thing. But I think 2024 is when the organizations actually put their heads together to solve real world problems using
Yeah.
AI.
Yeah.
It was
Agreed.
more of an year of implementation, year of where the executives as well as mid-level managers, they kind of took AI seriously and started enforcing rules within the organization that, hey, 30% or 40% of my code can be written by AI, or can I start using some tools, AI tools, to reduce the workload. So I think this year will mark that as an year of AI being taken seriously.
I think so. No, absolutely. And we hear it left and right. Chat GPT claims AGI or coming soon, and everybody's sort of on this edge. And then you hear other perspectives that, LLMs have hit a plateau, and it's like, which way are we really going? What's really happening? What is AGI? People define it in so many different ways. And it's like, I mean, at least for me, it's like, when an LLM can receive data in a particular context and step out of that with new ideas. It's that creativity that really makes a difference, in my opinion. What do you see there? Do you see AGI around the corner? I mean, there still needs to be so much more sophistication within LLMs, and will LLMs be able to have that creative spark? Are they going to really make that change, or do you see
I think,
other technologies probably coming in and solving these sort of
yeah.
creativity issues that LLMs, or hurdles that LLMs are running into?
So I have a slightly different perspective on this, Antonio. So I think AGI is probably about a decade away. But what you will see is that you will start seeing a lot of AI agents being created using whatever the existing technology that we have. So, for example, Salesforce has agents, Agent Force, which allows you to create human-like interactions based on a
Hmm.
previous data that you have,
Right.
whether it is offering customer support or solving quick customer queries, answering about your product, or going and doing some marketing campaign on your behalf.
Yeah.
Similarly, there are a lot of these other companies. All major enterprises are coming up with their own version of AI. You'd have seen, like, in Photoshop now you can say that, hey, I want a mountains in the background, and the mountains in the background would have added. So that
Amazing.
literally saves, like, hours and hours of time of graphic designers.
Right.
So I think what will happen in next few years is that majority of these kind of repetitive tasks that earlier, we thought automation tools would do effectively, but now with AI, I think they can be done almost in a way humans do. So that will happen. Creativity aspect of intelligence, I think, at least for the next decade, would still be in the hands of humans. But the non-creative tasks.
So I hear where you're coming from. It's almost like you create these sort of agentic type personas that are able to tackle very niche problems, and that intelligence grows the more data it receives, and then it becomes a master of its domain. And then if there are several masters of several different domains, those domains can come together and create larger perspective, and perhaps one analyzing the other could then maybe in effect create or have some, call it creativity or innovation type thinking. It's like, how do really, I mean, putting the solutions together and allowing them to learn from each other based on historical data would hopefully would show that I'm looking for how it would be creative, in a sense, how it would deduct or add to a particular processes based on its information. And so,
If you look at the jobs, right, and you in any enterprise, there are only about 5 to 10% jobs that actually require creativity. The rest of the 90% of the jobs are just the implementer jobs. So
yeah,
the creative people have already, envisioned something, put together their plan, and the rest of the people are just following their instructions and creating something. And
nice,
a very
nice relationship you're doing here. I love this. Okay.
simple example is, we have a tool called Figma, where a UX designer does a design of a product, a web application or a mobile application. Now, from the Figma to say somebody, a React developer who is able to create that web design into a React code, this entire process could be automated through AI. The
Mm-hmm.
creating the React code does not involve creativity. It just involves some level of coding grunt work, where you are
Right.
just looking at the Figma design and writing down those pages.
Yeah.
This work can be done by AI. If not
Yeah.
100%, maybe 80%, 90%, and
Right.
that's where there's a huge productivity boost.
Yeah.
Similarly, there's a backend design, database design. The AI can do 90% of that work, and then you have like a backend database engineer can look at it and say, okay, hey, there's small changes, let me do this.
Right.
But it still provides that 90% time saving.
And so
Similarly,
then there can be AI with like a QA, right? They can go through the different
as
features and
well,
sort
right?
of test them out and just show different errors that may be coming up. So like the different angles of how to approach and solve a problem. The creativity is really from the design perspective, putting it together and then speaking to it and allowing it to sort of connect all the dots, and then having QA as a third layer kind of go through and solve those issues that are pending. Amazing. I think we were onto something this soon.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well,
Awesome.
Abu, I absolutely love this conversation. I think you brought up so many really great points and you brought together a lot of the confusion that I personally had in many different areas and brought it together. What are any final thoughts to wrap this up?
Antonio, I always love having these conversations with you. I mean, you bring the energy, you bring the vibe. So it's always a pleasure having these conversations. I think this, another the most important thing, at least in my professional life, is doing this podcast in 2024. Um, I've been thinking to do a podcast for a long time, almost like 4 to 5 years, but never had a chance to explore that side of life.
Yeah.
And with you last 4 months, I think we've created some amazing memories.
Yeah, no, we haven't. We're just getting started, and I appreciate the conversations. I love it. I think we started this literally in October. It was October that we started, so it's only been like 2 months, and I think that there's been such incredible brainstorming. And I think that's what we, as human beings, I think that communication allows us to see deeper into, many different areas of life and discussing these areas and being curious about perspective and brainstorming always can lead you to the next sort of problem or issue or opening of the mind. And so I love it and I appreciate the conversation. And this will be basically our last conversation for 2024. We are recording our next one on the 1st. So I look forward to it and thank you again.
Thank you. Pleasure is all mine, and it's always a very memorable time with you to do record this podcast. In 2024, these podcasts have made it really special.
Thank you, my brother.
Thank you. Thank you. Take care. Bye.
All right. So